Now, the opening scene of any movie is and so films typically kick off with an impactful or enigmatic sequence which hooks the audience from the jump. But of course, this doesn't always go according to plan. Who among us likely had high hopes for the new Mark Wahlberg and Kevin Hart starring Netflix original comedy Me Time? Even the most subterranean expectations were surpassed in this very first scene. The film, about two old friends, Huck and Sunny, reconnecting in middle age, kicks off with a scene set 15 years prior, where the two are preparing to base jump off of a cliff edge in Utah. Sunny chickens out at the last minute but gets blown off the cliff by a gust of wind regardless. Yet, after getting over his initial terror, he manages to enjoy the wingsuit's gentle glide through the air. Huck joins him as they have a serene moment in the air together before Sunny is smashed in the face by a bird, causing him to spin wildly out of control until Huck is able to pull his ripcord. Beyond the painfully low-effort humor of the scene as written, the execution, well, it is horrible. The VFX are painfully low rent, and while that might pass muster in a YouTuber's short film, in a Netflix movie that likely cost tens of millions of dollars, with a deeply terrible voiceover narration from our superhero protagonist Patience Phillips, who listlessly details her own sorry life working for a cosmetics company. Soon enough, we're drowned in exhausting exposition about the company's malevolent owners, and its agonizingly clean resurrection. You really did not stand a chance, did you? Admittedly, the previous film, Halloween H2O, did such a spectacular job of basically ending the franchise by having Laurie Strode chop Michael Myers' head off with an axe that it seems practically impossible for the franchise to continue. Yet, rather than take the 8th film in another direction entirely, like say an anthology or a Season of the Witch-esque adjunct, the producers decided to bring Myers back under insultingly convoluted circumstances. Resurrection's first 15 minutes alone contained two head-smackingly inane reveals which ensured fans lost all hope for the film, if not the entire franchise early on. Firstly, we learned that Michael swapped places with a paramedic before he died, and so Laurie actually decapitated a poor innocent man whose larynx Michael conveniently crushed to stop him from calling out to Laurie. And though Laurie returns to lure Michael into a trap at a psychiatric hospital, the prologue ends with Michael killing her. Even worse than that though, he only gets the upper hand because, after what happened with the paramedic, Laurie decides to check that she is indeed about to kill Michael. This gives him the opportunity to turn the tables and throw Laurie off the roof to her death. Everything about this was just wrong, and fans held nothing back from vocally letting the film really bland, TV-esque camera work and thoroughly cringeworthy introduction to the new leads. It is a setup where everything falls flat and basically nothing works. It lets you know as soon as possible that you're in for a soulless 2012's fifth Resident Evil film, Resident Evil Retribution, may have been an absolute load of hot garbage, but at least it teed up an amusingly ridiculous finale to the series, with all of the surviving heroes holed up in the White House fending off against a gigantic influx of zombies and creatures infected by the T-virus. It suggested that the 6th and final film, imaginatively titled Resident Evil The Final Chapter, would be an epic action extravaganza like the franchise had never seen, a balls-to-the-wall carousel of insane CGI carnage. But Paul W.S. Anderson left fans deflated in record time by basically throwing that tantalizing setup out with the bathwater and making the final chapter about something else entirely. In the vein of the other sequels, the film opens with yet another story so far, tiresomely expository explanation of how the T-virus was created. After this, Alice tells us that the White House sanctuary was a trap, yet we're never shown the resulting mayhem for ourselves, only the aftermath, with Alice crawling out of the buildings. You know that this 2005 adaptation of beloved horror video game Alone in the Dark would be a waste of 96 of your precious minutes on this earth. Because even if you gave Boll the chance to prove himself capable of adapting this IP to the big screen, he obliterated that goodwill within mere seconds. Because Alone in the Dark begins with the thing Cats, which remains one of the most bewilderingly awful prestige films of recent years. Widely touted as a likely Oscar contender prior to its release, public opinion pulled a sharp 180 once the first trailer dropped, with many feeling that the decision to have the entire cast perform their roles through VFX-assisted motion capture was a major mistake. And while Hooper and others from the production assured fans that the trailer featured work-in-progress effects, the end result was no less a nightmarish fever dream from its very first scene. It takes mere seconds to appreciate that Hooper has thrown us headlong into a digital hellscape beyond GI-soaked sets filled with actors whose faces have been awkwardly blended with feline fur in a deeply unsettling and off-putting way. Every single character fell straight into that uncanny valley and could never escape. The VFX and art direction simply weren't good enough to convince us that we were looking at persuasively anthropomorphic cats. Instead, it felt akin to watching a surreal tech demo reel that should have never never seen the light of day. An unforgettable and terrifying vision which thoroughly undermined the undeniably game efforts of the cast. And that's Cats in a nutshell, a spectacularly misguided project which did a visually hideous disservice to its talented ensemble from the jump. And it really only gets worse. Fan wanted 2009's live-action adaptation Dragon Ball Evolution to be a good movie, but let's face it, we all knew in our heart of hearts that it almost certainly wouldn't be. And the film wasted no time at all in confirming that. I mean, where to even begin? There's the horrible exposition dump opening which feels like it was studio mandated once they saw the end result, and comes complete with howlingly grotty CGI visuals which just scream mid-2000s in the very worst way. And it doesn't get any better from there. The goofy opening sparring sessions between Goku and his grandpa Gohan let us know we should not expect any quality action, but instead unconvincing wire work and laughably wonky VFX. Doing a Dragon Ball movie right required more than a mere $30 million budget, and a far more reverent, source-faithful approach. Unsurprisingly, Evolution bombed critically and commercially, and nobody's bothered making another live-action adaptation in the 50th over a laptop screen, right? While few were expecting much from Sony's Slender Man movie, especially after news broke that numerous key scenes were cut late in post-production, at least it could have offered up a few neat scares, right? It'd make sense for the film to open with a poor sap falling victim to Slender Man and setting the tone for the rest of the story. But alas, it kicks off with a focal group of uninteresting teens waffling through a slew of inane banter at high school. Later that evening, they all reconvene to discuss the legend of the Slender Man, with the characters robotically explaining his form and powers with all the enthusiasm of somebody reading information off a screen. And you know what, they're doing that because that's precisely what happens. It's fundamentally uncinematic and about as boring a way to start a horror movie as one could imagine. There's no atmosphere, no tension, nothing beyond an overpowering sense of tedium. It speaks to a film that never substantially raises the pulse or justifies its own existence beyond cynically cashing in on a piece of